I'm so excited about this. You know how easy it is to take your home videos and turn them into movies?
First, you choose your shots. Then you tell your story. This is where you talk and tap, and Videolicious will trim the footage down, layer it in as B-roll, add logos, music, transitions, graphics, and effects in just seconds.
Adobe Premiere Pro CC is a powerful, feature-rich, cross-platform, non-linear editing application.
Listen to this. Get an iMac, of course. Get your digital video camera, hook it up, and start iMovie.
Every day, hundreds of thousands of filmmakers, broadcast editors, videographers, and journalists around the world rely on Premiere Pro to create a massive array of compelling content.
As technology surges ahead, can you always believe what you see in newspapers, magazines, on the nightly news, or the internet? And what are the rules for manipulating photos or images?
Well, it's an awful lot easier now to make an edit that's deceptive.
Katie Couric is venturing into the gun control controversy with a documentary called Under the Gun, but it's backfiring.
If there are no background checks for gun purchasers, how do you prevent felons or terrorists from purchasing a gun?
But that sequence with its 8 seconds of stunned silence was edited in a misleading way. Here's what actually happened.
How do you prevent felons or terrorists from walking into, say, a licensed gun dealer and purchasing a gun?
Well, one, if you're not in jail, you should still have your basic rights.
Editors have the power to inform, but that also means they have the power to misinform.
It would be very easy to change what people say. I mean, you know how editing is. You could put things together.
You need to learn how to edit and edit well. I wish I had studied journalism more rigorously.
They've got effects in there now. You can, make it real fast, or get slow motion, make it dramatic.
It's so much easier in non-linear editing to deceive the viewer than it was certainly when we were in film and probably so in tape as well.
You had to take the film out, and you had to get a razor blade and a block and use splice tape. That was much more difficult.
Back then, you basically had to wait hours and sometimes more than a day in order to turn the video, to turn the images around.
But now it's so easy to take a scene from earlier or later and put it in the order that you want.
Non-linear editing was non-destructive. You could assemble a cut in whatever order you wanted and go back and make changes without disturbing the rest of the assembly. There was no generation loss you had with linear editing that required you to copy from tape to tape. It was just a much more natural way of editing.
There's an awful lot of manipulated video around us now because it's ubiquitous. Everybody captures video. It seems like everybody has some capacity to edit it. It's inevitable that they would use those tools for their own means.
Journalists in today's world are trained to get the story that will deliver the widest audience. And so they have an incentive to use any tool available to them to make the story more compelling. And without question, they go out of their way to use those tools.
I want to take a moment to clarify something from Monday. We had a report that inadvertently and wrongly characterized the plea from a Milwaukee woman whose brother was killed by police.
Don't bring the violence here and the ignorance here.
As our viewers saw, she demanded that the violence stop in her community, but in fact she also said that protests should instead take their violence to the suburbs.
Burning down shit ain't gonna help nothing. Y'all burning down shit we need in our community. Take that shit to the suburbs. Burn that shit down. We need our shit. We need our weed. I don't wear it, but we need it. We need our gas.
You moving them around.
We need our food. Y'all don't understand that shit. We need that. Y'all want to hurt somebody, take that shit farther out. Don't be here. Don't bring the violence here and the ignorance here.
I regret that second part of her statement was not included.
It's possible to keep something accurate while still not being true. That is to say, I'm not changing the words you're saying, but if I change them into a different order or I cut out something you say in the middle of a sentence, then you've actually changed the truth of it because you've altered the context.
2 teenagers are wounded on the city's south side. It happened at East 74th as an 18-year-old man and 16-year-old girl were hit while standing on the sidewalk. The male's in good condition while the girl's expected to recover. And kids on the street as young as 4 were there to see it all unfold and had a disturbing reaction.
No, I'm not scared of nothing.
When you get older, you gonna stay away from all these guns?
No.
No?
No.
What do you want to do when you get older?
I'm gonna have me a gun.
Because I live right here.
I'm gonna have me a gun.
You are? Why do you want to do that? You know what happens when
I'm gonna be the police.
Okay, well then you can have one.
There was an interesting edit in this last election cycle that caused quite a lot of controversy.
Here's Bill Clinton with Charlie Rose on CBS last night.
Well, if it is, it's a mystery to me and all of her doctors. Rarely, but on more than one occasion over the last many, many years, the same sort of things happened to her when she just got severely dehydrated.
Today we learned that CBS edited out a stumble Bill Clinton made in that answer, one that may be very telling. Here's the longer version that did air today.
Well, if it is, it's a mystery to me and all of her doctors, because rarely, but on more than one occasion over the last many, many years, the same sort of things happened to her when she just got severely dehydrated.
Frequently was edited out.
Well, which did he mean? Did he mean that she often collapsed or that she almost never did that? So they were roundly criticized, and I think rightfully so, for editing that soundbite.
CBS says one clip that ran on CBS Evening News was edited purely for time while on deadline for the live broadcast.
In a moment that's that important, what's another 2 or 3 seconds for clarity so that you don't raise suspicion in the viewer's eyes? They're just looking for a reason not to believe you. Don't add fuel to that.
We're not called the Fourth Estate for no reason. It is our job to make sure that the electorate is well informed. We have the resources. Essentially, voters hire us to gather information for them. And if we are providing flawed information, then we are taking their money under false pretenses.
Here in Florida, where I live, we have a lot of mobile home parks, and a lot of people come winter in Florida, and they live in these mobile home parks, and some of them are really very attractive. I mean, they're really something. But it would be possible to take one and make it look like a tropical paradise, and it would be possible to shoot the garbage cans and to shoot the barking dogs and make them look like trailer trash.
The day the statue of Saddam Hussein was torn down by American troops in Baghdad was an interesting day to show the difference between presenting images that are real and accurately presenting what happened.
This is the moment U.S. Marines literally toppled Saddam Hussein, and history was made.
Careful examination of those broadcasts and photographs suggests the crowd, which varied in size, topped out at just a few hundred. And it was to a significant degree composed of journalists and Marines. Between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m., CNN replayed the toppling every 7.5 minutes. Fox replayed it every 4.4 minutes. Wide shots from the live coverage, which revealed a more subdued reality, were not replayed. The iconic images that shaped public opinion in America did not reveal the actual scale of the event.
So here's a case where the images were technically accurate, but they didn't really capture the story. So there was an editorial process going on there where, in the emotion and in the attempt to create exciting news coverage, they really in many ways misled their viewers as to what had happened that day.
It's all in what you mean to make it look like. Are you including not just the details, but the context? Accuracy plus context equals truth. And it's important that we not use just selective details, but that we always try to place those details in context.
Special effects are used on a regular basis now in news stories, and depending on how they're used, this can be borderline unethical.
We don't see a lot of newsrooms having serious conversations about special effects like slow motion, for example, or fast motion, for example.
Recreations, for example, are often special effects where we use slow motion, and we'll even put something underneath and say this is a recreation. But I think to the casual viewer at home, they don't view it as a recreation. They view it as this is legitimately what happened.
The question always is, what does the viewer think you did? So if it's absolutely obvious that you've sped something up or slowed something down, then that mitigates it. I'm able to process that. It's where you change my understanding without telling me. You sneak it by me that I don't know. And then I don't understand how to process that information. There is a video that I've used in my teaching over the years of these boats that are out racing on a frozen lake. They're ice boats. And the boats look like they're just traveling at like 100 miles an hour, man. They're flying across the screen. And I ended up asking the photographer, I said, man, what person in their right mind would go in that thing going so fast? And he says, well, we sped it up, because it was kind of boring. For them to just kind of barely be moving, on the screen. I agree, it's more interesting video that it's moving so quickly, but it's just not true. And if you're going to speed it up, you've got to tell me that. You can't just let me try to figure it out.
If I play dark, somber music as I'm showing a certain person in one of my stories, that sends the message that this individual is not a good person. Whereas if I play upbeat, lighthearted music for someone else, it's almost as if it's a Western, and I get the bad guy versus the good guy. And that's done on a regular basis. Just any systematic content analysis of local TV news, you see that's done on a regular basis.
It's a reality for nearly 1,000 Canadians and counting. They're over 60 and behind bars. Living in prison is no one's idea of a retirement plan, and our jails aren't equipped to accommodate an aging population.
When I was a news reporter, I did a story one time on aging inmates, on old guys who created some horrible crime and now were sent to prison for life, and they were old. And we were doing a story on this guy who was a two-time killer, had killed his wife and killed another guy. And he was a real lowlife, no doubt about it. But he was old. I don't remember, I think maybe he was in his 80s. And we had video of him as he was walking through the prison yard. He was aches and pains and barely moving. He belonged in a nursing home, not a maximum security prison. And the whole story was about, do we really want to put people in a maximum security prison when they're in their 80s? And, if you swung the gates open, he couldn't leave. So the whole story was raising that question. It wasn't necessarily a sympathetic story, but it was a story that was raising a serious societal question about, is this really what we want to do? And I remember using video of him. It was a beautiful fall morning, and there were mockingbirds all over the place, and one of them landed on a razor wire above where he was. And while we were editing this gorgeous morning scene of this guy walking around, you could see his breath while he was walking, and he was moaning. And I remember putting a little tiny bit of ambient music behind it. And there was no particular reason to do it, except that it made the experience even fuller. And I didn't really think that much about it. When we did it, it just seemed like it fit, and it was an interesting video experience. My own mother called me that night and said, "Don't make me feel sorry for that guy." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" She says, that music is making everybody think that he's somebody we ought to pity, and he killed his wife, and he ought to be in prison, and don't make me feel so sorry for him." Mom, nice to hear from you. But the truth of the matter was, we did, by using that music, And by using that beautiful video, the mockingbird and the dew on the wire and so on, we made the scene so much more tranquil than it was in real life. And we were trying to set a scene that I think, in hindsight, was reflective of what I was feeling. And what I was feeling was, wow, this is really not very smart for us to be spending all this energy keeping this guy in prison. When in fact, the people of the state of Tennessee in that case had made a decision. They in fact did want a two-time killer in prison, and that was their decision. And I realized too late that just by subtle editing, I was trying to impose my own thoughts on that story.
In the television world especially, whether it's news or entertainment, everyone knows the difference an editor can make. An editor can change the story. If I have an hour of news footage and I assign it to 5 different editors, I will get 5 completely different stories. And that is what we're dealing with, right? So which one of those is the true story?
I would never change anything that someone would say, because when you're doing a story, someone trusts you. They're taking the time to give you information about themselves or what's going on in their lives, and they're going to watch it. So you're not going to want to twist something that someone says, I mean, in ethics alone, but also because that is your source, that's your resource, and that's who you're going to go to for another story. So you don't want to get someone mad. You just want to be fair to every side of the situation.
Back when I was a producer, it was, I felt a moral obligation to protect the smallest person that I could. I felt an ethical obligation to confront the most powerful person that I could. And usually when you combine those two, you're meeting the parameters of what you should be doing as a journalist. And then I used to ask myself things like, would I watch it? Would my wife watch it? Would my mom watch it? And if I was meeting those 3 criteria, then a lot of times I'd say, okay, so I'm ethically sound, I'm morally sound, and I'm somewhat interesting. That should be on TV.
I'm old school in the sense that I still think the press, broadcast journalism, in addition to all the other tenets or forms of journalism, should remain the fourth estate as a system of checks and balances. I hate the marriage of profit and journalism, whereas it's now understood that you must make a profit. So because of that, I think going backwards a little bit and emphasizing the importance to a democracy for journalists to get true information that's not colored one way or the other, recognizing that there is no such thing as true, you can't be biased, but recognizing that we all have biases. You can't be truly objective. So even though that's true, that should be the goal, to be as objective as possible. And anytime you engage in any kind of editing that might affect that level of objectivity, I think you're teetering on unethical behavior.
One of the things that has happened in this last election cycle is that I fear that there are some people that just don't believe anything that anybody says, and that's dangerous.
A lot of things get lost in translation, and a lot of people say the media is corrupt.
It's right to be skeptical, but I think it's hazardous when we turn skepticism into cynicism.
I'd like to believe that people who get into this field want to tell the story correctly and fairly. So I guess I would hope that the consumers watching believe that.
When we start to never believe anybody, when we start to believe everybody's a liar, it seems to me we do ourselves a disservice. We as journalists, we as videographers, need to be sure to not give that cynicism movement any kind of ammunition that would say, you know what, we're all lying. Everything I do is some shade of a lie. Strive for truth. The old saying in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics is seek truth and tell it as fully as possible. I like that a lot. Seek truth and tell it as fully as possible. And where you know you're falling short, try to point that out to the viewer.